Hi again then guys, and welcome to episode 41 of Weekend Warriors, the review series of course for the sports cars, coupes, big luxury executive coupes, modern muscle cars, and basically everything in between on GranTurismo 6 for the most part in particular. Now this particular car is kind of an alternative version of a car which we have in the Import Nights series, in a similar way to another car from this manufacturer which we've actually covered before. And the manufacturer is of course Acura, which as Lexus is to Toyota or as Infiniti is to Nissan is the US market equivalent of Honda. Now I'm not a huge Acura fan, but I do like the style of some of their cars. The RSX, which is this particular vehicle, aka the Integra in Honda form, is one of my preferred Acura models in terms of the visuals. It's not a stunning car, I do think the Honda looks better, but it's not a bad looking car by any means. It has a similar kind of sleek style, I would say, to something like the Honda Accord Coupe on GranTurismo 6, which is also, I think, a really good looking car. Now, the performance on this model is kind of at a disadvantage compared to the Type R, because it's not a Type R, and unlike the Acura Integra, it's not even trying to be, because with the Acura Integra DC2, more specifically I should say, that car is kind of the equivalent of a Type R, although it's not as good. This car isn't trying to be. It doesn't have the wing, it doesn't have the body kit, it doesn't have the sheer performance or spec. What about in fully tuned form though? Does it at least have some kind of alternative use? Does it offer basically a sleeper version of what the Honda version does? Or is it just one of those cars which isn't necessarily bad, but it's just not outstandingly good either? Well, first of all there's the price. The car is just under 25 grand, that's a pretty decent start. It's not amazing value considering that the Honda version isn't that expensive anyway, and especially when you consider that you can get a full premium version of the DC5 from Honda. Now personally I don't actually like the premium version as much. It has a slight facelift, which I've never been a fan of. I prefer the non-premium DC5 in terms of the way it looks. Not because it's a non-premium, but just because of the style of the car and the generation of Integra in terms of facelift that it has. Now this car also has a 2-litre engine, it's front-wheel drive of course, and it's naturally aspirated. It does not have the sheer power of the DC5s. Now the premium DC5 in particular, you're looking at around 450, I think 455 horsepower comes to mind. This one you're looking at basically a full 100 horsepower less. This car's putting out 352. Now that's not bad, but it's not as good. The torque is also not particularly high at 223 foot-pounds, but that isn't really surprising. That's kind of a trademark of Honda VTEC style engines, and again, just Honda performance cars in general. They don't go for torque because they don't really need it. They tend to be small, light and nimble anyway. Kind of like a motorbike. So same thing, motorbikes don't need a lot of torque, generally speaking either. Now the weight on this car is pretty good, but again the problem is the DC5 is the full-on performance version, so it has the advantage there. The fact that this isn't designed to be does mean that it is a little bit heavier. Now to say it's a little bit heavier is kind of unfair, because if you were to compare this to many other coupes in the non-performance coupe category, it actually has a really good weight. It's really low in comparison to those cars. It just doesn't seem that great when you compare it to the DC5, because the DC5 can drop so far below 1,000 kilos, aka 1 tonne. Now this car weighs a little bit over a tonne at 1,026, but that is not bad. That's not bad at all. That's a very lightweight coupe, especially for its size. It's not a small car. The horsepower per tonne, mainly due to the lower weight, is pretty good. It's 343, which, for the power, as I said, is pretty decent. The PP is, well, kind of understandable, but perhaps a little too high for its own good at 496, but at least it's not over 500. That does mean that it has some use at that level, especially if you take it down to say 480, 475, that kind of level. Now at those, say, moderate to lower moderate PP levels, it does have some use, because when you bring out an Integra, and I've said this about some other cars as well, people know what to expect. When you see a DC2, Even when you see something like an EK Civic, for instance, you know what you're in for. You know roughly how good the car is, you can guesstimate how good the driver will be, and adjust your own choice and tuning accordingly. With a car like this, people aren't familiar with it. Most Acura models are kind of like Infinitis. People don't use them that much on the game, and as such, many people don't realise if they're good, and if so, how good they are. Now, as it happens, this, as we've covered, is not as good as the Honda DC5 Type R, but it's not bad either, and as such, it does actually back up some of that sleeper appeal that the name of the car, the manufacturer it comes from, and also the appearance lends it. It is an understated version of the Integra, and as such, I would say it does have some use, especially given it's only a 25 grand car anyway. Now, as far as performance, it's a good car. It's light and it's got a moderate amount of power, so the performance certainly isn't bad. The acceleration is pretty good, just like with the Honda versions. The best point about it is the cornering ability, and although the top end performance isn't great, it's good enough, especially for lower PP levels. It's not the kind of car which you'd expect to be insanely quick anyway, so it doesn't really disappoint in any particular way, because if you bought this car expecting it to be the same as a DC5 Type R, well, then you were kind of expecting the wrong thing anyway. If, however, you went into it expecting just an alternative to something like that, in a similar way to the Acura DC2, which we covered before, of course, then I don't think you'll be disappointed by it. As I said at the outset, it's not an essential purchase by any means. But if you want to try something different, and certainly for sleeper appeal, it may be worth checking out. But that's it for this pick. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.